Welcome everyone to another episode of Pop Rant Radio, the podcast where two pop culture junkies discuss popular and sometimes not so popular culture. My name is Moss, I'm one of your hosts, and with me as always is my good friend and co-host, Eric. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing all right.
Doing
Your
all
phone
right.
almost screwed you over there. It dimmed real quick.
Yeah, I'm still reading this off of the prompt.
So, now that E3 has closed.
Oh yeah, video games.
Yep.
What'd you think of E3?
This year I thought was pretty okay. I'm not really sold on the VR experience yet. I haven't tried it yet, though. I hear that's kind of like the thing, is when you try it, that's when it really, sucks you in. And then you're sold, and then...
Like a vacuum.
You're spending $400 on the Sony VR headset, which they dropped... I think they were originally calling it the Morpheus.
How very Matrixy.
Lawrence Fishburne better have got one for free, as well as Samuel L. Jackson. If anyone catches that Super Bowl reference.
Isn't Morpheus, that was funny, isn't Morpheus also in Sandman? Isn't there a character called Morpheus in Sandman?
I think so.
Okay.
He's also in Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Or not Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Pee-wee's Playhouse.
Ah.
As Cowboy Curtis.
Cowboy Curtis.
Yeah. Lawrence Fishburne shows up on every episode. He's like, "Howdy, Pee-wee!" And the whole furniture thing.
Does he sound like that?
I think he does, actually. I haven't seen it in a long time. I haven't seen it since it aired on Adult Swim, oddly enough.
Weird.
Yeah. But okay. But no, E3 I thought looked good. There was a lot of big surprises and a lot of not big. E3 kind of sucks nowadays though, in the way that everything is released early.
Well, everything's because I was watching a report on 2015's E3, which for those of you who don't know, E3 is the Electronic Entertainment Expo, and it is a video game convention. Well, it's primarily a video game convention now.
The video game convention.
Right, where they reveal a bunch of upcoming games or new consoles, that sort of thing. And anyway, I was watching a thing where they did a study on the 2015 E3, and it was over 65% of the games that were shown at last year's E3 still haven't been released.
Oh yeah, it's bad.
So it's they just show things way in advance before there's any sort of even remote release date or anything like that.
Well, yeah, they showed for example, No Man's Sky. They showed, which is a PS4 space game. I don't know if you've seen it.
Yeah.
They've shown it. This is the first E3 in 4 years where No Man's Sky hasn't been shown because it comes out in August. But no, it was really good. I think there's always that stupid contest about who wins.
Right.
Was the best show. And the past 3 years, it's always been Sony.
Mm-hmm.
And this year, it's Sony.
It's definitely Sony.
Microsoft had a lot better of an E3, but still not very close to Sony.
And Nintendo was just hey, new Zelda, yay.
And Nintendo's here's a 5-second Pokemon, and here's Zelda for 12 hours. Which, it looks great, don't get me wrong.
It does look really cool.
Wild is the wind?
Breath of the Wild.
Windy?
Breath of the Wind.
The Windy City.
The Window Washer.
Chicago.
Ferris Bueller's Day in Hyrule.
Link joins the band Chicago as he tours America. But no, it looks great. It's very much going back to almost a Skyrim-esque kind of thing with
yeah, it looks open world.
Very RPG-esque.
Kind of going back to the roots of the original Zelda, and even to a lesser extent Zelda 2. Link's Adventure.
Ooh. The Legend of Link.
Where it's just kind of, you can go anywhere from the onset and you're free to kind of explore the world at your own pace, and you're also free to get murdered by monsters that are way too difficult because you shouldn't be there.
Right. That was the worst thing about Legend of Link. They tried to do a similar thing to Zelda, the first one, and it just doesn't work when you have to level up.
You can get destroyed. So speaking of E3, video games.
Is that what was there?
Sweet segue, Moss. Oh yeah, anyway. So today we're going to talk about storytelling in video games.
Right.
It's a conversation I was actually having the other day with my good friend Josh, and he suggested that we do an episode on this. He was suggesting something along the lines of making choices, how you have to make choices in video games, or games that really kind of play up the concept of choice. And we had a 15-minute discussion on it, and then I was man, I wish I was recording this.
Yeah, this is one thing that I want to talk about for a while now. I keep on, everyone's telling me don't have an idea. I always bring up the concept of video games that should be movies, or video games that would make good movies. Because at E3, Ubisoft was like, hey, Assassin's Creed comes out later this year, and we're giving you a Watch Dogs movie before you even tell us if you like Assassin's Creed, and the first Watch Dogs sucked. So here's a movie about it. Enjoy.
So speaking of not knowing what to do this week, we're going to talk about video games. So the first game I want to talk about is Batman Arkham Asylum. The first game in the Arkham series that we've now had 4 of.
We're getting a 5th one, though, now.
Getting a 5th one soon.
Right.
So
but it's not Arkham Origins. That's the first one.
So Arkham Asylum, as the name kind of implies, is a game where you play as Batman, and you go into Arkham Asylum, which is the asylum for crazy people and lunatics and disturbed people.
It's not PC.
Where Batman, puts all of these criminals into, like the Joker and Scarecrow and so on, because they're not
incorrectly put some of them in there.
Yes, because they generally don't go to prison; they go to this psychiatric hospital, for lack of a better term.
Right.
And at the beginning of the game, Batman brings the Joker into the asylum. The Joker's goons kind of take over the asylum, and Batman is trapped inside the building,
right,
and has to go through and take out the bad guys. And you meet most of his rogues gallery, and
mine is a couple key ones. It was kind of weird that they left out some really big names. I mean, we get stuff like Joker, Bane, Riddler, Harley, but then we get like Victor Zsasz, who is a very small lister. He's very interesting, but he's very small.
He's been around a lot more in like the later comics, right, as opposed to earlier stuff.
But we don't get any Two-Face or Penguin or Catwoman or...
Yeah, this is true. And I think the idea, to their credit, I think the idea is that some of the characters, specifically like Penguin and Catwoman, don't really quote-unquote belong in Arkham Asylum.
No, they don't. But so there's like records of them in it.
Sure.
Which doesn't make any sense.
That's a good point. So I guess they tried to separate that as much as possible. But what Batman Arkham Asylum does really, really well, and I think is a large part of kind of all the examples that we're going to talk about today, is Batman Arkham Asylum establishes a consistent tone and an atmosphere that permeates throughout the entire game.
Right.
And really kind of sells you on you being Batman inside of this world.
Yeah, and I know you and I have talked about this in the past, that its sequel, Arkham City, does that a little bit, but it's not as solid as it is in this game. Arkham City feels a lot more like, this is a Batman video game. It doesn't feel like this is a Batman experience. Like, you feel like Batman, and you feel like you're in Gotham, but there's several moments where you're kind of ripped out, the curtains lifted, and you'd realize, oh, I have a controller in my hand.
I'm in a video game.
I'm not Batman.
Yeah, specifically because in Arkham City, and I think basically every game after that, there seems to always be some sequence where, like, Batman is poisoned, or Batman is, like...
He's loopy now.
Yeah, and you have to find the cure, which is very, like, video gamey thing to do.
Which they kind of do it in this, but I kind of liked it in this.
Yeah, because they had the Scarecrow toxins, but it wasn't like, okay, now you have to go on a side quest to find this cure or this antidote for whatever the poison you just drank, Dr. Jones. Like, terrible.
Yeah.
So
there's always that fight where you have to keep jumping to the left or right to avoid the shockwave from, I think it's Raish in City. I think he like slams his sword in the ground and like, just give us a fight hand-to-hand with Raish. Don't give us like some giant sand clone. Right.
So Arkham Asylum does a lot of things really well. But again, like we were saying, the tone and the atmosphere and the level of detail that they've placed into the game, there's a lot of Easter eggs throughout.
Yeah.
Like you'll come across characters, like their signature weapon or like claw marks on the wall for Catwoman, Riddler trophies for the Riddler. Like, there's a lot of details inserted here and there as you go through the game and the different buildings that are offered in the environment, along with the audio logs, which after BioShock in this game kind of became like a cliche in a lot of video games. But BioShock in this game specifically, the audio logs do a lot to kind of give you background information and give you background atmosphere, so you really feel immersed in the world that Arkham Asylum is presenting to you.
Yeah, and they enhance the story.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think a lot of games nowadays rely on the audio logs to tell the story.
Right, because you can, especially in this game, you can never touch the audio logs and you can still follow and understand what's going on.
Right.
But very much in the same way that BioShock did. In BioShock, the audio logs kind of let you fill in the gaps of what this now derelict, abandoned city, what it was in its glory day when people did live there, and kind of gives you the breadcrumbs that lead up to the cataclysmic event that led to the downfall of the city of Rapture.
Yeah.
And in the same way, Batman Arkham Asylum gives you these kind of background details to tell you these are the characters that you're dealing with. And the characters in the Rogues Gallery, Poison Ivy, the Joker, Scarecrow, these are characters that people are just familiar through pop culture in general, whether it's comic books or the animated show or movies.
Yeah.
And it's not something that you have to say, okay, here's an explanation for who exactly these people are. But what Arkham Asylum does really well is it takes pieces from the Nolan movie, and it takes pieces from the animated series, and it takes pieces from even like the 1960s show, and kind of amalgamates them into this kind of standalone DC video game universe. And those audio logs and the details in the environment and the Easter eggs kind of give you as the player a background into, okay, this is this universe's version of the Joker, or this is this universe's version of Scarecrow, and so on and so forth.
Right. And I would say it does everything really, really well, with just a couple exceptions. I really don't like Arkham Asylum's Bane. Their version of Bane feels kind of like the Batman and Robin Bane, as opposed to, because as much as Dark Knight Rises is not a good film, its Bane is, I think, very adequate.
Right. In this game, Bane is kind of like this hulking brute.
Yeah, he's kind of just a meathead. He's an idiot. He's not smart. He's not calculating. He doesn't think anything through. And that's very apparent. As well as, I'm not super fond of the Killer Croc design. I kind of like it in the sense of like a video game world, but my Batman fan in me is like, Killer Croc is not 8 feet tall, covered in scales, and have a tail.
Yeah, it doesn't really match the tone of the game itself, and biggest outlier of that, of course, is the final boss battle with the Joker, where he has the chemical venom put into him, and he becomes basically like the Hulk version of the Joker.
Well, but it's not Venom, it's Titan.
Right, it's the new version of Venom.
Updated Venom.
Right. And that by far is the weakest part of the entire game, where you have this like hulked up Joker that there's really no precedence for, and it really does not fit the tone of the rest of the game that the game has clearly established the atmosphere that, had so far. That's by far the biggest disappointment. But in general, the kind of the darker, more serious tone with, it still has some humor interjected here or there, but it really firmly establishes this is how this game plays. This is the feeling that the developers wanted you to have while you walk through the halls of Arkham Asylum. You feel like you're in this penitentiary for the criminally insane.
Yeah.
And owing to the combat system and the art and all of the details they put in, you feel like Batman. The combination of the environments being as detailed as they are and the gameplay allowing you to feel like you are Batman sneaking around or you are Batman fighting, those kind of come together and coalesce into this story that's really brilliantly told, because you do get to see the world through the eyes of Batman, realized by all the details that they've bothered to place in this game.
Yeah, and I mean, like, a lot of moments in it stand out. Of course, like we said, the Scarecrow stuff really sticks out. I also really like some of the Easter eggs you can find. Like, you can find a jail cell that is covered with calendar notes of, like, the days being torn off, and it's clearly, like, a Calendar Man reference. Or you'll find, like, a tea set up in one, with, like, a stuffed rabbit on one side. It's a Mad Hatter reference. One of the ones that I always, like, stood out to me, which really kind of bummed me out in the game because I was waiting for him to show up, which I'm kind of glad he doesn't, because then he shows up in the next one and has one of the greatest boss fights in the history of video games, and that is you eventually find a jail cell that's covered in, like, icicles. And it's like the cell itself is, like, broken and torn, and you can see that someone's escaped, and it's clearly Mr. Freeze, who by no means is an amazing Batman villain, but these games do him really, really well. And
yes.
Arkham City's boss fight with him is, like I said, one of the best ones you'll ever experience. So, one of my favorite video game series, which is actually getting a sequel, which we saw a little bit at E3.
Sequel is the name of the game.
Yes. Sequel or, like, reboot, reimagining, that's very questionably a sequel. Looking at you, God of War. And that is Mass Effect. Now, this one kind of is a weighted bag. It's got positive and negative. And in my opinion, the positive very much outweighs the negative. I am full on aware of, the Mass Effect 3 ending and everyone hates it and stuff like that, and I'll get to that. But the way that Mass Effect 1 and 2, and even the third one up until the ending, like the way that they set up their world and they set up their story and the amount of control you have in the story is, I think, one of the first times I've ever felt like my character mattered in a storyline. So, you play as Commander Shepard, who is an avatar, essentially. He's your character. You make him whatever you want him to be, good, bad, whatever. And he is a member of this like galactic force that their entire goal is to essentially defend the galaxy. He eventually finds out this imminent threat from this ancient alien group called the Reapers. And as stuff progresses, you eventually realize that the Reapers are coming, and when they come, they're going to wipe out all life, not human, but just anything. Any alien species they find, it's gone. Like the Reapers wipe the slate clean. Mass Effect 1 was littered with small choices and big choices that first time I played it, I was like, well, this is kind of interesting. It feels like a generic RPG. But then when Mass Effect 2 came out, you're offered this opportunity to import Mass Effect 1. And essentially what that means is every choice that you've made in Mass Effect 1 affects something in Mass Effect 2. And that's really, really cool. But the moment where it shines is Mass Effect 2. In Mass Effect 2, you gain, I think it's like 8 teammates or something crazy, join your fleet to go take on these Reapers that are starting to come in. And there are several moments throughout the game where people can either get really close to you, or they can leave, or even towards the end, they can die. If they're gone, they're gone. Like, there's no coming back. And just that experience, I remember the first time I played it, one of my characters that I really, really loved died in a cutscene that was not even in my control. He just, boom, he's gone. And that just, like, it was, I had to go back and I had to keep on trying to, like, do different things to get it, because it was a choice that I had made, not realizing that it could, jeopardize a character's life. Very rarely do we get this feeling of total control within a story.
Yeah, and it's a testament to the games themselves that by the time you reach, the end of that second game, where it's possible that some of your characters can die, you've developed an emotional attachment to several of the characters.
Oh, yeah.
And when they die and you lose them for good, like, it's an emotional experience. Like, it has an impact on you as a gamer, because these characters have been developed enough where you start to empathize with them and care about them as people. And so when you lose them, it does have an emotional toll, and the story has been told in a way to lead you to that position.
Yeah, and so that's kind of like, I think it's a wonderful blend, because we've talked about this in the past, that there's really two approaches to story in video game, and that is either there's kind of like the third person idea where you're watching a character, like Nathan Drake or Kratos or Cole McGrath. You're watching these characters go through the story. You're controlling them, but what they say and do is what their character will say or do.
Right. You play as a specific character who kind of has a set personality, and you can make choices and changes throughout the game that alter that slightly. But at the end of the day, Nathan Drake, for example, is a treasure hunter, and
Right.
he is sarcastic, and he is cocky, and he is charming, and he is witty. That's who his character is. He's not going to set off a bomb to kill his friends and family. Like,
right.
that's just not who he is.
Jeopardize the whole thing by killing someone close to him.
Exactly. He is the character who he is.
Right. And then there's the opposite side of the spectrum, which is very much so like your Skyrim, Fallout, or even I'd argue mostly of what Mass Effect is, and that is you play as an avatar, which some people argue is more immersive, but at the same time can do what Mass Effect does, where at some point you kind of feel like your character has its locked in area, where he's kind of become as developed as Nathan Drake or Kratos or any of the other ones. I'm naming the same ones over and over again.
Yeah, and in a little bit I'll kind of get into the nuances of the different types of storytelling that you can do in a video game. Kind of like you said, the primary two that we usually talk about are you either are playing as a specific person, or you have created the character yourself and you can kind of determine who that character is.
Right.
And it really kind of depends on what kind of game you have and what kind of story you want to tell. Which of those two choices, I believe, is the wiser of the two in any given specific situation.
Yeah. I'm not going to get on this too much because it's been talked to death and I'm 4 years late to this party. The third and final installment in the Commander Shepard trilogy, Mass Effect 3, does something that a lot of people were understandably pissed off about, and that is that the ending is promised before the game came out. The ending was promised to be, this amalgamation of all your choices. They were all going to come to one final point, and it was the fate of the galaxy was going to be, everything leading up to this.
Right, based upon the choices that you've made throughout 3 entire games.
Right, 3 full-length games.
Yeah, your ending will be determined by the choices that you've made throughout.
Needless to say, it's not at all. It is, and I love this joke, it is literally pick the color that you want your ending screen to be.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, in the end, not to spoil too much, in the end, you find out that you are teleported to like this weird room in the Citadel, which is this big space, whatever. It's like a giant city in space. It's great. And you meet this ghost kid who's called like the Catalyst. This sounds horrible. This is what happens. And he's like, "What's up, Commander Shepard? You have 2 selections. Unless you're really good at the game, you get a 3rd selection. You either, 1, destroy all synthetic life in the galaxy, which is the Reapers, but also another species that you get kind of close to called the Geth. You can sacrifice yourself and overwrite like the Reapers mindset, I think. It's the blue choice.
Basically Neo your way through the Matrix.
Right, but then there's the 3rd one, which is combine yourself with the Catalyst, and synthetic life is no longer synthetic life.
So Agent Smith your way through the Matrix.
Right. God, it's so bad.
Spoiler alert for the Matrix.
And it's like there is no choice. Like no matter what choices you make, it's not like one is turned off or one is heavily like hinted at being the right one. You just choose right there. It's one final choice, but has nothing to do with the previous choices.
Right, and I think the biggest reason that's a disappointment in this game specifically is because all 3 games were so wrapped around the idea that your choices matter and your choices carry on and your choices have consequences for the remainder of the story. And ultimately, at the end of the game, it's kind of, what button do you want to press?
Yeah.
This is exemplified in another game called Deus Ex Human Revolution, which doesn't really involve a lot of choices throughout the game, but once you reach the final room, there's literally 4 buttons in the room, and it's press the button that you want the ending to. And in Deus Ex, there's not a lot of choices throughout as far as the storyline is concerned, but in Mass Effect, the entire series has been all about choice and the consequences of those choices. And then at the very end of this 3-game story arc, it's like, it's pretty arbitrary what you've done before. Yeah. Go ahead and just pick an ending.
And it's more than a morality thing. It's more than a good or bad. It's, some choices you have to have a certain level of, speech to get to it. Some choices you have to know what to say and what order to get to it. So it's not just, hey, you're really good, you get this one. Hey, you're really bad, you get this one. It was really intricate. And this ending just completely threw that out the window.
Right. And it's not like the things that you've chosen to do throughout the games kind of change the exact options for what you have, or it's not like, well, because this character is alive or this character is dead, you have to nuance your way through this choice, or you're presented with this different option, but the variables make it more complicated. Right. It's really just, hey, pick a card, any card.
But it did give birth to Marauder Shields, one of the greatest internet memes of the time, which I will never forget. That's the Mass Effect series. Overall, it's really, really great.
Yes.
And the 3rd game, I mean, the ending is terrible. I'm not gonna defend that at all. But the game leading up to it is just on par with the other 2.
Yeah, my friend Josh that I mentioned earlier, he said that he played like all the way up to the final area and then stopped and didn't beat it. And he was like, yeah, it's a great game.
It's awesome. There's sacrifice, there's character arcs, like they wrap up everyone's story really nicely. It's a really, really tight story. It's just that ending that kind of ruins it.
Yeah. So kind of tying back into the you are a character that you yourself created. Skyrim, the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. The entire Elder Scrolls series, which is a fantasy RPG series, has really always been defined by you create your own character, and you can make that character whoever you want them to be.
I think we can argue that it was Morrowind up. I don't know who's played Daggerfall or Arena,
that's essentially that's what I meant. So from Morrowind on forward, you can create a character and kind of make them whoever you want to be. But your character, in general, they never speak. They never have any dialogue.
What are you talking about? They Fusro Dal.
They don't directly interact as far as dialogue and storytelling goes. And they're more so defined by the actions the player takes throughout the game. The reason I feel that this really works in the Elder Scrolls games, Skyrim specifically, is because the world of Skyrim is populated by characters and places that allow you as the player to make interesting choices about your own player character.
Yeah, it's really, really well set up. There's like different factions you can join. There's a big war, like a civil war going on, and you can pick either side, or you can pick neither.
Yeah, and kind of going into that, there is a civil war going on between the Stormcloaks, which are kind of like the natives of Skyrim.
The Nords.
Yeah, and they want to return things back to the old ways because their enemy, the Imperial Legion, who is more about assimilation and bringing other races and other people into Skyrim and kind of getting rid of the old gods, the Nordic gods that the Stormcloaks still want to worship, whereas the Imperial Legion is kind of like, no, we're going to accept this new faith. We're going to be allied with the Thalmor, who are the High Elves that don't believe in any of the Nordic gods.
And they're total assholes.
And they are total assholes. But pretty much everybody in the fight is a total asshole, and that's kind of the point, and that's something that the game does a really good job of. And again, this is something I was talking about with Josh the other day, where the great thing that Skyrim does is it presents you both sides. It lets you interact with the Stormcloaks, and you see these people are like, look, we just want our home back, and we just want to be free to worship the gods that we want to worship. Why can't the Imperial Legion just let us be? But you also get to see things from the Imperial Legion standpoint where they're, hey, we're allied with the Thalmor, who are this powerful group of High Elves, and if we don't work with them, they're going to turn against the Nords, and they are more powerful than we are, and we have to keep peace in the region. So it's done really well to where there's not really a good guy and a bad guy.
Right.
There's just these two separate sides that both have different viewpoints on what's going on. One of the major storylines in Skyrim is the ability to join either faction. Another thing that's done really, really well is it's very much established that some people in the Stormcloaks and some people in the Imperial Legion, they basically just want peace. They basically just want to coexist with everybody else, and they're kind of just wrapped up in this civil war. And like you said earlier, there's also assholes on both sides that are bloodthirsty jerks that want to kill the other side. On the Stormcloaks end, some of them are racist because they don't want to have anything to do with the elves, or then they don't want to have anything to do with the Argonians and the Khajiits. Like, they're just like, hey, it's Skyrim and it's Nords, and that's all there is.
Right. Same
thing on the Imperial Legion side of things. There are just people who are like, I just want war and I just want to kill people, and that's my lot in life. So it's done really well because it shows you that no side is 100% right, but no side is 100% wrong.
Right.
And one of the major things that happen in the story is you can basically bring the Civil War to a close by allying with either side and kind of getting the sides to stop antagonizing each other and come to an agreement, because as you go through the story, one of the main points is, hey, there are dragons. Dragons have returned to Skyrim, and at a certain point in the game, you can kind of make both sides of the conflict see dragons are the bigger enemy, and we need to set aside our differences, even temporarily, in order to defeat this greater menace, this greater evil. But
at the same time, Skyrim's such a vast and amazingly large game that there's so much stuff that you can do besides this. You can go into like Dwemer Ruins, which are like these old dwarven cities underground. You can join the Dark Brotherhood. You can join that wacko group that become werewolves for no reason. You can join all these really, really cool groups, and these are side groups. These are side projects, but they're just as vast and like just as interesting as the Civil War.
Right. And the big thing is that, again, at the very beginning of the game, you do pick the race of your character. You do pick their overall kind of like starting skills.
Don't pick Khajiit.
But there's no point at the beginning of the game where it says, okay, you have to define your character's personality. You as the player, as you make choices to join the Imperial Legion or join the Stormcloaks or join the Dark Brotherhood Assassins or join the Fighters Guild or become a mage, the choices that you make within the game contextualize and define who your character is without having to explicitly choose certain lines of dialogue or make a binary good or evil choice. That's what's another thing that's really great about the game and the series at large, is that very rarely are there choices presented to the player that are binary as far as this is a clearly good thing to do and this is a clearly evil thing to do.
Right.
A lot of times you just have two options.
And it's just an opinion.
And it is just an opinion. It goes back to the Stormcloaks versus the Imperial Legion. There's reasons to join each side and there's reasons to avoid each side. And it really is up to the player. But brilliantly, the game doesn't force you into a decision. It really lets you make that decision, but it presents you with a lot of information and a lot of opportunity to interact with both sides before you come to a conclusion, and it's a conclusion that the game doesn't ultimately make you make. You don't have to do that side quest. I mean, as large a part of this game as the Civil War is, it's optional.
Yeah, you just push it aside.
Right, like most things in the game. Again, Skyrim gives you the choice and the freedom to do what you want to do, and by extension, to do what your character would do.
Right, and you build your own story, essentially.
Yes, you get to forge the storyline, you get to craft it, and that's in no small part to the world that Bethesda, the developer of the game, have presented to you. The only reason that your choices matter, or the characters that you interact with are interesting, or the locations and the set pieces that you go to give you so many options, is that Bethesda has created and crafted this world where choices matter and there are consequences for the choices that you make, but none of them are arbitrary. They all permeate out from what you as the player, and by extension you as your character, do helps define your experience in this world that's been presented to you as a wealth of options and opportunities. And another really minor point about Skyrim and the Elder Scroll games at large, the Elder Scrolls present you with a lot of lore and backstory about the world that can, kind of along the lines of the audiobooks, can kind of help feed into your experience of the game.
I mean, there's like 30 real books in the game?
I'm sure there's way more than that at this point. But you can literally read books and novels that are written from characters' perspectives in the game,
right,
which really help enrich and enhance the story. And the thing that I really, really like about the lore, and this is kind of going along the same lines as like A Song of Ice and Fire, is that all of the lore that you find within the game is written by characters within the game. So it's not necessarily factually, this is actually what happened. This is what people believe or people claim to believe has happened, and that's the histories that they've written down. It's like
a full immersion experience.
Exactly. It's not an encyclopedia of this is exactly what happened from this omniscient point of view. It's, hey, you're in Skyrim, which is generally controlled by the Nords, so everything that you read has this kind of slant to making the Nords look better.
Right.
And if you do find books that are written by other races or other people, they're generally like considered taboo, or they're generally considered dangerous, and that kind of changes depending on what game you're in. Like if you're playing Oblivion, the game beforehand, which is primarily based around the Imperials, which are
Tamriel.
The humans, everything kind of has the opposite effect. Like they're kind of slanted around, hey, this is how great the Imperials were. And it's just this great moment of immersion, which is completely optional. You can never pick up a book. You can never read a scroll that has any sort of lore on it whatsoever.
Except the Elder Scroll.
Right. But Bethesda has taken the time to put all this material in the game. So if you want to enhance your experience with the wealth of information that they've provided you, you absolutely have that opportunity.
Yeah, and I think one of the greatest things that the game offers, and I kind of immediately abandoned the main quest to go after these ones, is it carries over the idea from Oblivion of the Daedric princes. And like you can go through and you can deal with all of them again in Skyrim, and you can get all of their items in Skyrim. You can even see some of them in person. And I just remember like when I got to do that in Skyrim, it felt like a step above Oblivion in that way.
Yeah, for sure. And the Daedric princes are a great example, because the Daedric princes are essentially like a recombination of the Greek gods. They are these godlike figures, but they have personalities and they have different wants.
And they're very human-esque.
Yeah, they're even petty.
Yes.
Because, some of them desire one thing and some of them desire another. And it's a little bit of shift in tone from the main game, but it's not so far removed that it feels out of place.
Right.
Again, it gives you a lot of different options and opportunities to explore this world that's been so richly cared for and developed.
So I'm going to kind of break, and instead of talking about one plot, I'm going to talk about a plot device that's used very well in certain games.
Kind of a concept in general.
Right, and that is, I call it the bait and switch. You're led a whole way up through a game, and then it kind of like smacks you in the face and replaces it with something else. I guess a twist is a better way of calling it.
It's a twist.
But it's not a Shyamalan twist. So I'm just going to kind of run through a couple that I think are really, really well conveyed and do a really good job, and then I'm going to go into a small soapbox rant. We're in a new generation of consoles with the PS4 and Xbox One, and the last generation, the 360 and PS3, was very oversaturated with one kind of game. The gray, gritty, realistic military shooter games.
Yes,
right?
No shortage of those.
You could pick anything. but two really stood out to me. One of them is Call of Duty Modern Warfare. I almost said Advanced Warfare. Not Advanced Warfare. Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, right? Story is crap. Like, I don't mince words with that. I think it's not good, but I'll get to what makes it good.
There's a bad guy terrorist. He has to be shot.
You have to stop him now. But the other game is a game called Spec Ops: The Line. And one thing that both these games do is they kind of, both plots, at some point in the plots, kind of flips the whole market on its head and kind of says, hey, realize how you've been playing all these military shooters? It's not a good thing. Like, it's not a good thing that we have all these military shooters. What they're doing is not a good, these aren't heroes. This is a murderous, like, idea.
Right, because a lot of the military shooters, you know, not to get too political, but in a broad sense kind of desensitize the player to violence by the military or a military-type force.
Right. So I'll do Call of Duty's first because it's really just one bit that happens. In Call of Duty, it's kind of the most, you know, well-known scene in the game. You are in I don't remember what the city is, but you're in a city and you're leaving in a helicopter because you hear over the radio that they're dropping a nuclear weapon. Right? And you're like, oh, cool, nuke, you know, your guns blaze and everything like that. And the nuke goes off.
Maybe you are.
I'm not. Nuke goes off, your helicopter goes down, and then what follows is an incredibly uncomfortable scene as your soldier slowly, like, crawls from the wreckage, and you just hear him, like, gasping for air as he's inhaling, like, radiation and stuff. It's horrible. And I think it's a really good scene that just kind of says, like, this is the horrors of war. It's not this Hollywood, you know, running around shooting guys in the head and like, bah, bah, bah. And you're like, yeah, you're safe. It's a real horror. And Spec Ops does it too. Spec Ops does it constantly, where it's making you make these choices that, you know, you would make in other games and just be like, whatever. But Spec Ops makes you make this choice, and then they guilt you for it. They're like, hey, that was a human life that you just got rid of. Good job, dickhead. But to jump into a story that I think is better written, and that's Infamous 2. Infamous 2 follows it's the second story of the character Cole McGrath, who is part of this group of people that are affected by this explosion, which gives them superpowers. Very Static Shock-esque, which is very coincidental because his power is electricity. And in Infamous 2, you're kind of, like, things are kind of settling down, but there's still factions out there that are causing trouble. And you eventually have the idea to join one of two women that are kind of leading their own groups. One of them, which is clearly hinted at to be the good side, is a woman who has the ability of ice. And the other side, which is clearly hinted at to be the bad side, has the ability of fire. But then halfway through this, like, not even halfway, it's like right at the end, you're presented with a choice, like you are throughout the whole game, but they switch them. And I remember when this happened, it's like a really big step back moment because the whole time you have this perception of good and evil is just red and blue. It's a red and blue choice. And then they flip it, and it kind of makes you think that it's like the world isn't just this black and white. It's very much, like we said with Skyrim, it's very opinionated.
Right.
And essentially they switch. The woman who controls fire is actually, her reasoning and her idea is very good and pure, while the woman who controls ice is kind of selfish and, like, I think it's something like she disregards, like, a whole group of people that are going to get injured or something crazy like that.
Right. It's a giant reversal of what the game has led you down the rabbit hole to believe, hey, this person's good and this person's bad, and they've kind of reversed it in a way that makes you question, oh, wait, what have I been wrong the entire time?
Right, and it's really, really good. It's like I said with the other two military games, it kind of turns this whole concept on its head. And, you know, you really kind of step back from it. Now I'm going to get on my soapbox. I'm going to talk about a game developer / writer / god of video games who I can't stand, and that is David Cage, who constantly thinks he's writing these bait and switch or these twists, you know, with games like Heavy Rain and Beyond Two Souls, and they're lifeless, and it's like the movie Now You See Me, right? Where Now You See Me likes to do this dumb shit with magic, but it likes to make you question whether or not it's magic or it's real or it's magic. And then it's like, in the end, it's like, no, it's all real. Bullshit, it's all real. Half of that stuff you can't freaking do. So it's clearly magic.
Right, and it's just explained away like, oh, it worked for reasons.
Right, they did something...
Sidebar, Now You See Me is a garbage movie for garbage people. I'm sorry if you like it, but you're wrong.
It was a bunch of mirrors. Like, no, screw that. That's not, no. And that's what David Cage, I'm specifically talking about David Cage's Heavy Rain. Heavy Rain has a lot of moments in the game where he thinks, because he's so smart, he thinks he's writing like this really cool twist, and it doesn't matter. Heavy Rain is a detective story where you follow 4 separate characters kind of as they slowly kind of intertwine into one storyline. The main character is arguably a character by the name of Ethan, who is a father who...
He's arguably named Ethan?
Arguably named... I didn't catch that. He is definitively named Ethan. He has 2 sons, loses one in a car accident because his son's an idiot. Then his second son, who's also an idiot, gets kidnapped by a, like, kind of famed serial killer by the name of the Origami Killer. So you play as Ethan trying to, one, kind of clear his name, but also find his son. There's Shelby, who's like a private detective who's kind of figuring it out as it goes along. Woman, who is a
journalist.
I can't remember her name. She's a journalist, also naked through portions of the game because, David Cage is a real good writer. And half her scenes are just, they have no fucking point to the whole story. And then there's Jaden, who is a detective as well, but
he's like an FBI agent.
Yeah, and he is like a drug addict or something.
That part's kind of weak, yeah.
Right. Look at the cover of the game, though, and you'll know immediately who the Origami Killer is. It's the one who's got his head down and he's covered in shadows. There's several moments throughout the game where something will happen. You'll be like, oh, wow, what happened? And then they have like the big reveal scene in the end where it's like, here's what actually happened. And half of it makes no sense or couldn't happen. Like there's one part where they're in like a weird antique shop and someone gets shot and they're like, oh man, someone must have snuck in and shot him. Nope, it cuts to like the big solution scene and the guy climbs out the window and then climbs back in the window and then shoots him and then climbs back out. Like, why? It's overcomplicated and it doesn't work.
Right. So Heavy Rain is actually a game that I enjoyed playing a whole bunch, but I do agree that when you get to the end, the story doesn't really make a lot of sense in a lot of places. Like there's a lot of holes kind of poked throughout the plot.
Yeah.
I think what Heavy Rain does really well is it has a lot of really good set pieces. It has a lot of good individual scenes that really stand on their own and create an emotional response from the player and create a lot of tension and a lot of excitement. But like you said, when you go back and kind of examine things, the story really breaks down. And that doesn't necessarily have to be the end-all be-all, but the game is essentially you playing the story. There's not a lot of traditional gameplay, so to speak. You're basically playing a movie. So if that's
DVD menus as the controls.
So if that's going to be the premise of your game and that's how you choose to tell the story needs to be airtight and the story needs to be really, really solid. And Heavy Rain does kind of fail in that respect.
Yeah, I know we talked before about this, and you brought up the scene where the reporter is being attacked in the basement by this like crazed murderer guy.
Yes. And
how it's a really intense scene. And it's really intense, but then I asked you at the end, I was like, well, do you remember why does she go there and what is the purpose of the scene? And you were just kind of like,
Yeah, and to be fair, I haven't played the game since it first came out
right,
years and years ago.
Which is like 5 or 6 years ago now.
But I do agree that there are a lot of parts where I think they were trying to convey that, she's a journalist, so she's trying to cover all the leads. Jaden's an FBI agent, so he's doing all these investigations, and very much in the line of like a movie like Narc or a movie like Seven or more importantly, a movie like Zodiac. Not all police work that you do necessarily leads you to the answer that you're looking for.
Right.
That being said,
it does.
There are parts where like they're fun to play, but they ultimately don't contribute to the story, which, like I said, if your game's going to be all about the story needs to be
do it good.
It needs to be airtight, yes.
Yeah, and it goes back to the thing that I said with Arkham City, which is that breaking immersion moment.
Mm-hmm.
And that does happen like at several points throughout this game. Especially the creepy sex scene where it looks like 2 mannequins hitting each other.
It is really, really awkward.
But another one is like Jaden goes to like a car dump and he fights like Tyrone or like T-Pone or something like that.
And in that scene, he is looking for a clue, but then he ends up fighting that guy, which doesn't have a lot to do. And the drug addict thing, like he's clearly addicted to these pills or whatever it is, and that doesn't really pay off in the story. It's just there to
add tension.
Yeah, there's a lot of like little setups that don't really ultimately reconnect. They're like Chekhov's guns that never get fired. Like it's things that are specifically pointed out, like the fact that he has an addiction to these drugs, but that ultimately doesn't have a lot of relevance in the plot.
And I'm not going to talk about Beyond Two Souls. Just no, we don't have time for this. But yeah, it's just the idea of like a bait and switch or a twist or kind of turning everything on its head I think it's a really, really great story element. And if you want to try it, you have to make sure it works. You can't just... It's kind of like how people make fun of M. Night Shyamalan all the time for his twists, when sometimes his twists just don't make sense. Like The Happening or, Signs. Like, the twists in those are just stupid and, like, they can't be explained.
Right. We've talked about this before, where if you're going to have a mystery and you're going to ask who did it, was it the butler or the car mechanic or the waiter, it can't be the space Leviathan that nobody mentioned up until this point.
It was the creepy twin brother that was locked in the attic and is only being revealed now.
Yes.
Which is what Heavy Rain does.
And in any story, if you're going to tell the story well, and if you're going to have a twist, that twist has to make sense in the context of the story that you've told so far. It can't be random. It can't be arbitrary. It can't be this Deus Ex Machina moment that's just inserted in like, hey, this explains everything, but it itself is not explained at all.
Yeah, it also suffers from the Arkham Knight trope, which is randomly showing you something that like has no importance, but then you're like, wait a second, then it's like that's the ending then. Like Arkham Knight does it, where Arkham Knight just randomly starts talking about Jason Todd. Well, guess what? The Arkham Knight is Jason Todd.
Spoilers.
Yeah, and then this one, it's like, wow, there's a flashback where Detective Shelby watches his brother drown, just like how the Origami Killer lets all his victims drown. Go learn how to write, David Cage.
There's a way to tell a story. There's a way to tell a story effectively, and there's a way to tell a story with a twist.
Effectively.
But this is not an example of it.
Yeah.
So the last game that I want to talk about specifically is L.A. Noire, which was a game published by Rockstar.
Yep.
And incredibly interesting game. So L.A. Noire, as you may have guessed, takes place in the 1940s. It's very much this classic noir setting of this kind of like seedy city.
I think it's Hollywood.
Classic golden age Hollywood vibe going on.
Yep.
And the main character that you play as is Cole Phelps, which again, he's a character that's the game's already built and he has an established personality. Although you influence the choices that Cole makes throughout the game, he ultimately is the character that he is.
Right.
He's a veteran from World War II, finally coming home after the war is over, going to spend time with his family, and he ends up becoming a patrolman in the police force. As you progress throughout the game, Cole solves a couple cases that kind of elevate him to a higher up rank. He becomes a detective.
Yep.
He eventually moves to the Vice Squad, and throughout the course of the game, he's actually demoted to the Arson Squad later on.
Where he still gets to do detective work.
Exactly. And the gameplay is fantastic because the game is built around the idea that you as a detective get to question people and search for evidence and look for clues and that sort of thing, but you ultimately have to make determinations based upon whether you think people are lying to you, based upon the evidence that you've gathered, and based upon their reactions to your questioning.
Right. And man, is this game hard.
Yes.
It is incredibly difficult because if you miss one thing, like it can jeopardize an entire question.
It can. So for example, there's several parts in the game where you're questioning a witness to a crime, or you're questioning a victim. You're trying to extract specific pieces of information about them, and you can use evidence that you've gathered earlier, sketches of suspects, clues found at the crime scene, that sort of thing, to kind of proceed down a line of questioning. And the game has a delicate balance to play here because the game is built around facial animation technology.
Yeah, and it was very pioneering for it.
Yes, when the developers of the game would film actors speaking the dialogue and having their facial movements mapped out onto the characters in the game. So it gives the game a very realistic, authentic look during dialogue scenes.
Yeah.
So the difficult balance that the developers had here was to balance making things obvious to the player, because the player has to pay attention to facial animations.
As well as twitches and stuff like that.
Right. Without going so far overboard and kind of portraying somebody as clearly this person's lying. They're they're scratching themselves. Their eyes are shifting back and forth.
Dangerfield as he tugs at his collar.
Exactly.
I didn't kill her.
So there's this delicate balance to play because the player has to be able to make decisions based upon the mechanics of the game, but it can't be so overwhelming that it's ridiculous. And for the most part, the game really finds that balance. There are a couple of times where you as Cole have a dialogue option to make, and you just kind of want more information because you can kind of choose to be aggressive with people or inquisitive or understanding as you're going through the dialogue scenes. And there are a couple of times where you're like, well, I just want a little more information. And Cole's like, did you murder him? And you're like, whoa, that was not the exact reaction.
Cole knocks him over the head.
Yeah, because you don't know exactly how Cole is going to react to the choices that you make. But in general, it's fairly intuitive, and those instances are fairly rare. The thing that this game accomplishes more than anything, again, kind of like Arkham Asylum, it nails the tone and it nails the atmosphere.
Oh, yeah.
It has the whole period aesthetic of the 1940s Hollywood.
Yeah.
Like, they really, really nail that. You know, you can drive down the sunny boulevard and, you know, all the people are in the period clothing and the period cars and the way the buildings are. And
I always love, it's kind of like a cool little dev thing. After most cases, like if a case takes like a really bad turn and you have to go back to your squad car or you have to go somewhere else, like every time you get in the squad car, it just starts playing like a lone trumpet as like you drive away, and it feels like a movie. Like,
yes,
it feels very much like I'm waiting for it to cut to black and white, or like start raining, or something. I'm waiting for Casablanca to start playing.
Yes, it really plays.
Bogart's gonna walk out somewhere and start talking to us.
Yeah, it really plays with the tropes and the classic feeling of the period of time that it takes place in. The game borrows heavily from noir films like Casablanca, or specifically Chinatown, because at the end the plot is very, very similar in structure to Chinatown's plot, which, spoilers for Chinatown, which is a movie from the 70s, so if you haven't seen it, I apologize. Because ultimately, the plot is based around this kind of conspiracy. So the overarching idea of what's going on is Cole is investigating these crimes and eventually kind of figures out that all these crimes are tied to this big conspiracy. So there's this program called the Suburban Redevelopment Fund that's basically designed to give veterans returning home from World War II places to live.
Right.
It's this program that's kind of designed to build houses for these men that served overseas and are now coming home to kind of nothing. It's a way to kind of give back to them a little bit.
Help them jumpstart their lives.
Exactly. And then tied into that, we figure out that Cole, his unit while he was overseas, some of the members of his unit kind of crop up in the plot. And it also turns out that there's kind of this morphine smuggling ring going on from the morphine that was smuggled from the supplies of the military. And Cole starts to discover this connection, and it really comes together once Cole is starting to piece together certain things. He's kind of used as a scapegoat for the media when it comes to the Suburban Redevelopment Fund, and that's when he's demoted to arson.
Right.
And when he starts to investigate certain fires, he kind of makes the connection that, hey, these fires bear a strong resemblance to the fires that are over in this new like neighborhood development, which of course is being built by the Suburban Redevelopment Fund.
Right.
And ultimately Cole, along with a couple other characters, discover that the Suburban Redevelopment Fund is kind of this giant front for these 5 or 6 guys who make up this like council of guys who are behind the conspiracy, and they're essentially building these houses but using bad materials to make it appear as if they're creating this neighborhood.
They're really cheap building houses.
Yes, and they're trying to get the government to buy up this land, which is basically worthless. And they're essentially frauding the federal government into buying up this property, and then they're going to make off with all this money. Cole, of course, discovers all this, and while he's working with his partner, who's pretty much the only person that he can trust, at the end of the game, again, spoilers, Cole ends up dying. He ends up getting killed during the investigation. And what's great is that throughout the game, as you've risen in the ranks and fallen, there's other members of the police force who you've worked with, like the chief of police and another detective who also is like this kind of celebrity in the town, and a bunch of other people. And the closing scene of the game is these people who are ultimately involved in the conspiracy and ultimately responsible for Cole's death. They're getting up and giving a speech at Cole's funeral, talking about how great of a guy and how great of a police officer he was. It's this great culmination of these people that you as the player know are responsible for Cole's death are essentially lying to the public at large about how great Cole was and how much they loved him and how much they respected him. And you as the player, as well as Cole's partner and his now ex-wife, know this is all fucking bullshit.
Yeah.
Like, this is all garbage. But very much like Chinatown, it ends on this downer note of, you can't win against this corruption.
The hero never wins.
Yeah, and it really, very much like a classic noir, it ends on this down note, and it ends on the death of our main character at the hands of these corrupt individuals.
Right, which of course makes you assume that they just get away with it.
Right, exactly.
No one else is going to open this because he dies.
Yes,
evil scares people off.
Right, evil succeeds through fear and intimidation and corruption, and the good guys lose.
Right.
Which, as you know, is my favorite ending.
Oh yeah, it's always good.
Even though I love the good guys, anytime I play these games, like I'm always like the paladin and the paragon of pure light and goodness. Like I always play the good guy in games. Whenever a story is told through a movie or through a game or whatever, and the good guy loses, I always love that ending.
Yeah, so I'm gonna nerd out for a second on it too. A couple things that I really liked about this game, a story that doesn't, like, it picks up before and you kind of finish it before you get to the whole conspiracy idea, is the real life story of the Black Dahlia murders. And the Black Dahlia was a serial killer that murdered women and usually left them completely bare. Like, they were naked every time people found them. And this is a video game, and nowadays in video, like when this game came out, nudity was still, it was present in games, but it wasn't ultimately present in games. And they don't do anything. Like, no holds barred. Like, they show everything.
Right.
You have to come up and you have to examine these bodies that have been brutally beaten and stabbed and
rated M for mature.
Yeah, hardcore. Like, I remember, this is worse than any Grand Theft Auto. Grand Theft Auto is usually like it's the R-rated movie, and this is the X-rated movie.
Right, but the big difference in LA Noire is that, like, the nudity and the sexual content are there to help tell the story. They're not there
just thrown in there.
Right. They're not there arbitrarily. They're not there to be controversial. They're there to help tell the story.
Right. And also, stair mechanics. Dude, I love me some stair mechanics. Whenever, like, someone walks up the stairs, I don't want that gliding, like, ramp shit. I want them to hit every damn step going down and every damn step going up. And Cole does it. He even grabs his belt. It's awesome.
I remember that. Very nice.
It's a side note, but man, I love me a game that has that detail. So the last one I want to talk about is the Shadows of the Colossus. PlayStation 2 classic. I want to say it's over 10 years old at this point, I would say. The game it does this really weird thing with the story where it kind of just thrusts you into it, and you kind of are experiencing the story as the character kind of finds it out.
Right. It places you into a world as opposed to walking you through it.
Right. There's no prologue. There's no, like, text. It's just you're shoved in and it's, here's your lover. It's not said if it's a girlfriend or wife. She's dead, and the spirit lets you know that, hey, I'll bring her back. However, to do that, you need to go clear the world of these, I think it's 13 colossi.
These giant monsters.
Right. And, like, at first, when you first hear about it, you're like, okay, giant monsters, it's going to be, slightly big. No, they're huge. Like, they're the enormous monsters, the size of mountains that you're climbing up as they walk around. But the beauty of the whole story is the whole time that you're going through this game, and as you're taking down these colossi and coming back and the guy's saying, hey, good job, you got this one, here's the next one, you as the character start to slowly realize that, hey, the colossi aren't attacking me when I get in close. They're just kind of walking around or swimming or flying or whatever they're doing. And you kind of similar to the bait and switch thing I talked about earlier, but this one's done differently because you kind of realize it as the character realizes it. You're being malicious in your intent with this, and it's kind of that idea of how far are you going to go for someone, how far are you going to throw away your morality to save someone that you love, and it gets worse and worse as you go along because these creatures are peaceful, they're just like, they're kind, minding their own business, and as you're killing them, you have to start asking yourself these questions of, why am I doing this? Is there a purpose to this? Who is this guy I'm doing this for? It's a really, really good story with that. And the character says nothing. His name's Wanderer, and he has no dialogue. He just has a call for his horse sound. That's all he gets.
Right, but the game does a really good job of conveying everything that you just said through visuals,
right,
through music, and through tone and atmosphere.
Yep.
It doesn't have to explicitly explain to you, hey, maybe you're not doing the right thing by killing these creatures, but you as the player feel that because of the tone and the atmosphere that the game presents you.
And it does a really good job with it. Like, you're just killing animals, essentially. And you're not killing animals for, like, a purpose that you need, clothing, food, whatever. You're just killing these animals out of spite for this creature or being that's helping you. I think it's a really kind of creative story that hasn't really been done. Definitely give it a shot.
They're really good at telling stories that, while very simple in their presentation, have a lot of complexity in their theme and a lot of complexity in the emotional response from the player.
Yeah.
You know, a lack of dialogue doesn't mean that you can't tell an interesting and somewhat complex story.
You have to witness it. It's a very good
It gives
show,
you
not tell.
It gives you the feels.
Yes, it very much so does. You know, from the very first Colossus you fight, when you're stabbing it and it's like it's bleeding the black ink almost, and it's just like, so it's wonderful. And yeah, the soundtrack, I know you briefly said it, soundtrack for this game is glorious.
Right.
It's one of the best ones out there.
The music, again, really helps establish the tone and the atmosphere and helps tell the story. You know, very reminiscent of like Star Wars.
Right.
Or, you know, Mad Max Fury Road, where the soundtrack is a player and how you perceive.
It's a huge part of this whole story.
Exactly.
So, obviously we've left out a very big name. Just kind of like, I want to add this at the end because I know people are going to comment and be like, how could you not mention any games from this guy, blah, blah, blah. We know Hideo Kojima. It would be a lot longer of a discussion if we talked about any Metal Gear Solid series.
Yeah, this is us not talking about Metal Gear.
Right,
Maybe someday.
This is the very first thing we said when we talked about this topic was, no Metal Gear Solid, please. Because that could be an hour on its own. We could do an hour per game almost at this point.
Some other day, perhaps. So this has been our non-Metal Gear discussion of,
Make that the title.
Of storytelling in video games. So we hope you've enjoyed it.
We have.
Let us know some of your favorite examples of storytelling in video games. You can contact the show in a number of places. We're available at POP RANT RADIO on Facebook, Twitter, and Gmail. You can also find us on YouTube, where all the episodes are posted, along with a couple of other pieces of content that we've done. And as always, if you're listening to the show on iTunes, please rate, subscribe, review, send us cookies.
Subscribe again. Grab your friend's phone. Do it for them.
Subscribe on their phone.
Tell your grandma to do it.
All that good stuff. We really appreciate it.
Don't tell her you downloaded it, though.
She probably doesn't understand the internet anyway.
Oh, ages.
So thanks for all that. And as always, we want to thank Major for the theme songs.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, man. You are the man. You are the pan.
You are the pan's labyrinth.
Banger, eh?
Keep all of it in.
So thanks again, everyone, for listening. We hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you next week.
Yep. Goodbye.